Hi, and welcome to this evening's Books Alive online event with Bernard Beckett, author of The Tunnel of Dreams, and Zach McCallum, librarian at Halswell School. The Tunnel of Dreams is a finalist in the Wright Family Foundation Esther Glen Junior Fiction category of the New Zealand Book Awards for Children and Young Adults. We'd like to thank the New Zealand Libraries Partnership Program for the opportunity to host these events this week and next. Bernard and Zach, whenever you're ready.
Thanks so much.
Excellent. All right, so we're here tonight to talk about Bernard Beckett and his amazing finalist for the Book Awards this year, The Tunnel of Dreams. As an author, it must be always very heartening to be nominated for the Book Awards and to have your book as a finalist. Is it you still get the same buzz being nominated?
Yeah, I think it's the same lovely thing. I think there's a bunch of things, of course, that are compromised about awards and award systems. And as a school teacher, I probably know that and live that every day. But book awards allow books to be promoted and publicised, And there's no point writing a book and asking a publisher to back it unless one of the things you'd really like is a lot of people who read it. And the glorious thing about being on a shortlist is that via wonderful things like this, or via just what happens online and what happens in displays in bookstores or whatever, the odds of people reading your book goes up, and it's a delightful privilege to create a story in your head, and then think that's unfolding in someone else's head somewhere that you're never going to meet, a person you're never going to meet. It's kind of the magic of being an author, and so anything that takes you to an audience is lovely. Yeah, and you're gonna take that with a smile every time. Yeah.
Cool. Would you mind telling us a little bit about Tunnel of Dreams, how it came about? It's different for me, I guess, in the sense that I'm a secondary school teacher, and I've written a bunch of what we call young adult fiction or teen fiction or whatever you want to. Essentially, the protagonists were mostly teenagers, and I'd never written younger protagonists. Then I had children, and I had two twin boys, and we would read to them, my wife or I, every night before they would be a bedtime story. And it's at some point when they were about 7, I thought it'd be cool shall I write you a story? How about, guys, we'll create a story and I'll read you a little bit every night. And, I'm hardly the first author to have done that. And that was a really lovely little experience, And so, what's it going to be about? What's going to be about these two twin boys? They're going to go on this adventure. And every day, therefore, I was under a certain amount of pressure to find a few moments in it to create the next installment, so that every night, what sort of dad's going to let his kids down and, not have the next bit of the story ready. So it was functionally just that at first. It was a thing to do with my darling boys. And that was cool. It was wonderful, and they would have suggestions as to what should happen next. And it was a weirdly constrained writing in the sense that they had pretty strong opinions about what their characters, who they were identifying with, and initially it was named their names until they said, not if it's published, no, it can't be in it. So it was them, and so there were a bunch of things you couldn't do because they didn't want certain levels of risk to befall their characters, or they didn't want their characters to behave in certain ways, and it had to be pretty balanced, so neither the kid thought they were getting a bit of the story. So it was, it was a happy, playful unfolding, and that was, in a sense, almost just a writing the first draft, but it was for another purpose. And then they were like, "Oh, do you think this will ever be in bookstores? Do you think it'll ever be an actual story?" So, I don't want to say things that let my children down, but yeah, maybe. Let me try to knock it into shape, send it to a publisher. So then I rewrote it. Of course, it was going to be slightly different then. Sent it off to a publisher, and then, they came up with more ideas, and we rewrote, rediscovered. And that was not surprising. It was a sprawling, reactive, pick a path, follow your nose sort of a journey because of how it had been written. And it was a little bit different, and it wasn't written to be a published novel. It was written as a story from the boys, and then it was an unusual process of trying to go from there to an actual shaped novel with a different kind of structure altogether. And there would have been successes and failures and those compromises along the way, but that's how it came to be. So what did they read the final book?
Yeah, they have. Yeah.
Yeah. Did they like the changes that you'd made, or?
Yeah, they still. Yeah, they. I think they really liked it. And I think there was a lovely passing over of it. It's no longer just their story. It's not. But there was, there was excitement for them in that too, because they know that book and that bookstore on that shelf. That was our story that we got read to at night. I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, I hope to think that's pretty cool for them. It's certainly very cool for me.
Absolutely. Would you be able to share a little extract for us?
Yeah, definitely. So this is it's a novel which, like so many stories before, some young children end up in another world and have to deal with all that's about. And at the beginning of such stories, in the time-honoured fashion, they've got to find their way into the other world. And sometimes kids are just playing and they find their way through the back of a wardrobe, right? Or sometimes a messenger comes and says, you're now X years old, the time has come to find whatever. So in my case, these two young guys are in the bedroom late at night and they wake up for reasons they're not sure of what's woken them. They look out the window and they see a light in a house, or maybe a torchlight in a house. But the point is, it's the one house on their street that's been deserted forever. It's called the haunted house amongst the kids. And here's a light on. And impulsively, as well as because they just get a feeling, they decide they're going to go down and explore. And that's the beginning. That's the first part of that. So what I'll do is I'll read you that little bit because it brings you into the story. So it's my way of getting them into this jeopardy that makes it exciting. So I'll put on my old man glasses. I can actually read the text, and I'll just read briefly what happens next once they've headed out into the night to go to find out what's happening in the deserted house. The boys hurried down the familiar street, keeping to the shadows, zigzagging to avoid street lights. Stefan crouched beneath an overhanging macrocarpa branch and waved his brother forward. They knew better than to carry torches. On a night like this, with a heavy gibbous moon just days away from being full, a torch would only advertise their presence. A little of Arlo's bravery leaked out of them when they arrived at the abandoned house, where the rest of the street felt safe and tidy, lawns mown, trees trimmed, curtains pulled snug against the autumn air. This house seemed suddenly sinister. Although the boys had explored its interior before, they'd have been in the bright light of day, when dark shadows went falling across the crumbling walls, and the windows didn't appear so depthless black and deathly. Stefan, too, had paused, although, as always, he was pretending nothing worried him. You go first, Arlo whispered in his brother's ear. I'll follow. He felt Stefan take his hand and squeeze it once, firm and certain. Nope, we die together, said Stefan. It was meant to be a joke, but Arlo's stomach lurched. However, this adventure ended. Something told him it wasn't going to be simple. Stefan dropped to the ground and crawled commando style beneath the unkempt bushes, through weeds and vines, over plastic milk bottles, faded soft drink cans and chip wrappers. Arlo followed close, remembering too late that there were blackberries. A thorn scraped the back of his leg, drawing a thin beaded line of blood. He didn't call out in pain. He was too nervous for that. And despite the fearful pounding of his heart, too excited. We're here, Stefan whispered. They shuffled forward to the base of a rotten wall. Stefan stood up. Okay, in the window. None of the windows on the roadside of the house had any glass, and it had been that way as long as either boy could remember. Who goes first? You? Stefan asked. Arlo saw now that was a mistake to have asked. He took a deep breath, muttered, I'm too young to die, and hauled himself up through the window frame. He landed inside with a dusty thud. The room was dark and smelled of rotting leaves and mushrooms. Are you all right? Stefan whispered. Yes, hurry. Stefan climbed through the window and they stood and listened to the strange sounds of the neglected house, trying to make out shapes in the gloom. The shadowed room slowly revealed itself as their eyes adjusted to the darkness. Nothing had changed since they were last here. Sofa faced an ancient square box television set. Armchairs stood on either side like sentries. On the wall to the boys' right, a mosaic of family photographs hung silent and neglected. At their feet, beneath a layer of garden debris, was carpet. Although it was too dark to make them out, Arlo could tell that cobwebs grew thick all around, tangled white forests alive with spiders. He shuddered at the thought. There's nobody here, Stefan said, surprised by the loudness of his voice. But I saw light, Arlo reminded him. Perhaps it was just someone looking around like we are. Stefan was ready to suggest they climb back out the window and return to the warmth of their beds. But a sudden noise kept the words in his throat. A thump, followed by a shuffle and then silence. The kind of thump when you knock something you didn't mean to knock. The kind of shuffle that you make when you move to catch it before it hits the floor. The kind of silence that happens when you stand perfectly still, listening for clues that somebody has heard you. was one of those moments where you either push forward or you turn and run. One of those decisions that changes everything. Arlo nodded in the direction of the only door. Stefan was already moving. Arlo stayed close behind. The room seemed to have become darker. Perhaps the moon had slipped behind a cloud. Maybe it was just a heightened sense of danger. Stefan held the door handle and looked back. He took a deep breath. Arlo clenched his fists. Slowly, carefully, Stefan opened the door. There was a click. A light flooded out of the room, so bright that Arlo felt a pain behind his squinting eyes. Overhead, a dazzling white light bulb hung from the ceiling. "Why did you turn that on?" Arlo demanded. "Better question," his brother replied. "Why is the electricity still connected in an abandoned house?" They were in the kitchen, but it felt as if they'd moved into a different world. There was no dust, no sign of even a single cobweb. Arlo looked carefully around for a clue as to what might have made the noise, but there was nothing. Just a stove and bench, a small fridge, a table, 2 chairs. At the far end of the room against the wall was a beanbag with a thick grey blanket thrown on top, and that was all. Stefan swung open a cupboard. "Look at this." The shelves were stacked with the kind of food you might buy if cooking was a problem. Tins of spaghetti, packets of biscuits, boxes of Wheat Bix, muesli bars. There was even a large bag of fruit bursts, all of it unopened. The shelves were as tidy as the room itself. "What do you think it is?" Arlo whispered. "Food," Stefan replied. Even in times like this, he couldn't help trying to be funny. "You're really annoying," Arlo told him. "I know. There's no one here. So what was that noise? Or maybe they climbed out the window." But the only window was high and small and latched from the inside. Something tingled along Arlo's spine. Something about this place was not right. He turned to his brother, about to speak, and then it happened. The blanket rose up from the beanbag like a ghost and came straight at them, making the sound of a frothing, snarling animal. The boys had both agreed that no matter what happened in the haunted house, they would not scream. They knew things were rarely made better by screaming. Arlo screamed. Stefan screamed. Stefan leapt to the left, Arlo to the right, leaving a clear path between them for the runaway blanket. A blanket with legs and a shape suspiciously like a head under it. Just in time, Stefan collected his thoughts, grabbed the blanket. This halted the blanket's progress, but not that of the small figure beneath it, which kept running. Arlo scrambled to his feet, racing after into the dusty room. The stranger hurdled an overturned coffee table, rushed towards the window. Arlo followed, leaping onto one of the armchairs, then springing off it like a diver, fingers outstretched before him. He managed to grasp the escaper's bare feet just as they leapt through the window. His captive struggled madly, and as Stefan hadn't arrived in time to grab a handful of shirt, they may well have wriggled free. "It's all right, we don't want to hurt you," Stefan said. The movement stopped. Then when the stranger spoke, its voice was even smaller and lighter than the body it came from. "You've already hurt me just by coming here," it said. "Let me go so I can climb back in." That's sort of the opening. It's next little bit. It brings them not into a new world, but into the strange person living in the abandoned house, who then will take them into, in time, this new world. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I could listen to you read the whole book. It's amazing.
It's very nice.
It's always interesting hearing authors read their own stories as well, because you pause in all the right places and you sort of lower your voice and you know how to read it, and it's interesting. It's different from us reading it ourselves in our head. It's a really cool story. Really, that part that you read us just kind of sets the sort of mysterious tone to the rest of the story about what's going to happen, where they end up. The going through the tunnel and coming into this mysterious place that they end up in. You don't give it a name as such. Was there a particular reason why you didn't name this place that they went to?
Yeah, I hadn't. That wasn't really something I'd ever thought of until you mentioned it, actually. And so I was trying to think about that. It's really funny when you create new worlds, you're playing relatively fast and loose with the rules. Readers are going to say, it's the same as Hogwarts, or it's the same as Narnia, or it's the same as whatever, There are certain rules that appear, but you're a little fast and loose about what do we mean here as an alternative world, right? In this case, we find out later in the book, and I don't think it's ruining anything to say this, that essentially it's a twin world of ours. And in fact, our world was created as an offshoot of their world to solve a problem in their historical past. So in essence, our their place, our place, same thing. You know, they would think of us as twin Earth, our Earth, we're twin Earth, and actually, well, I've got a moon and stars, and hey, guess what? It's a twin universe. You know, so yeah, it hasn't got a name as such. And it's the other thing I thought when you asked that, you know, is that just that interesting idea, is we only name a thing or a place when we think there's another place. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's sort of like, oh, what do they used to think? What do people used to call New Zealand before the next second bunch of people arrived? Well, when the first bunch of people arrived, it was just home. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You name it as a place when it's relative to, oh, you guys came from England, therefore we come from here. Let's give here a name. To an extent, there's an element of that, or you're going to name it in relation to your ancestral home, Hawaii, where you came from, or whatever. Right? So I think I did think that. It's sort of quite interesting. We only need to name things to distinguish them from other things. So when there's only one world, we don't even bother naming it. To those people, it's just one world. You know, does that make sense? Even when we talk about the world, we're probably not talking about a place name. We're just talking about a description of the world. I never, and then I needed to decide, am I going to name places? I can name towns and so forth. When I wrote it for the boys, they knew exactly where it was because it was our home street, you know, and it was our bay at the end, and then there was the Porirua Harbour, and it didn't need naming. And then it sort of becomes a little easier not to name it in some, or rather, I don't know. Actually, it's always a debate, and then you know, when you write, you can either write very, very specifically of place and time and flora and fauna, and the reader feels like they've been taken into this world, a very specific world, or you're quite generic in those details, so everybody can believe it's their world. And both have their strengths, I think.
Absolutely, because you've still got even this world that they find themselves in. You've still got sort of echoes of us as well, because you've got the birds and some of the flora and that kind of show up in the story as well, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. If it's going to have a pukeko in it, and we call it a pukeko, then it's you know, the Aussies have them, but they call them swamp hens or whatever. And I think at some point, even in the story, under the guidance of an Australian editor, there's a moment where we go, oh, my grandmother would have called it a swamp hen or something, so that the Aussie readers can go, one of those birds.
In this other world, it's free of technology. There's they haven't gotten to what we have. It's quite separate. Do you think you would cope quite well in this other place?
It's so interesting. I think what we do with other worlds is we create a romantic version of them, you know, and we're meant to, because it's an escape. We go, wouldn't that be amazing? And we play that. This place is slower lifestyle, and there's time for contemplation, and there's time to discover the magic that's always been within us, etc. You know, and that's really lovely. You know, the cold hard reality is it's cool to talk like that. And much as I love to go tramping and camping, there's also something sort of cool about, you know, a roof that doesn't leak, and you know, you know, a log burner at the end of the night, and so on and so forth, and being able to jump in the car and travel somewhere. I actually, you know, these kids spend a bit of the time in the bush there, and that's always been a love of mine, Kiwi bush and tramping and being amongst it. So, yeah, I think more than maybe many, I'd be pretty comfortable there most of the time, but there's many things about home I'd miss. Yeah.
Exactly. The two boys in the story, obviously, you kind of said that they were kind of came from your two boys. Is there parts of your sons and yourself in those characters?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's two questions there in a sense that there's inescapably always a great deal of the writer in the characters they write. The very best we can do is we write versions of ourselves, and sometimes I'm an elderly grandmother, and sometimes a irascible young boy. But in terms of our understanding of humanity, they're us, you know. And I think most of us would be tremendous liars if we said that our protagonists didn't carry a great deal of, I think, a lot less of who we are and a lot more of who we'd like to be. You know, hey, you're getting to create a fictional version of yourself. You're going to play with the better version. I hope that there's a real there's a gentleness to both my boys. You know, I hope, and long may that continue. It's a beautiful quality, and So it wasn't explicit, but I'm sure I was highly influenced by them. Because interestingly, you often don't know how a book feels or reads till other people talk about it, in a review or a comment or whatever. And people did comment about something about those boys' sort of values. Some people sort of made this claim or observation. It's almost an old-fashioned story, that there's something going on there, things about loyalty, about courage, about base values. These characters are in some ways more sort of morally aspirational than a lot of the sort of smart-ass teenage characters I've written in the past. It's a really interesting thing. Part of that will be influence of my boys, and part of that will be a parent talking to their children. Suddenly your responsibilities in the world feel really different. They shouldn't. You should have worked this out a long time ago. But children and parenthood is a magnificent way of focusing the mind. Is what do you actually care about? What do you actually want to pass on? What are the values you will really, suddenly when the reader is your own child, you're sort of really invested in your own child having a good life, which means you're really invested in them having a good set of values they can take into the world that will allow them to live kindly and gently and lovingly and so that they don't live a life of conflict. And so I was sort of, I hadn't thought of it, but I was really chuffed when people spoke of those qualities. I hope it's the sweetest story I've written in that regard.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, they kind of need those parts of themselves to get through and to find a way home again as well, don't they?
Yeah.
They've got to rely on each other, and the fact that they are twins gives them extra abilities in this world as well. So they need to rely on each other and have those things to kind of ground them, I guess, don't they too?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think definitely it's a celebration of twinhood, and some of that sort of just wishful celebration from a parental point of view as well. You've got to believe that especially when they're really young, bringing up twins is there are challenges, right? It's an interesting juggling act, and yet, yes, like as in anything that's hard, there's these beautiful compensations, and one of them is exactly that sort of mateship that's there, ready made and ready to go, and yeah, of course, that's pretty precious to me. So it's going to come through.
Absolutely. Obviously, and when they both come to this world, twins in this world, and some of the other kids have abilities that they, Arlo and his brother find themselves with abilities that they didn't have before. So like levitation and being able to move things with their mind, and those kind of things, and talking with animals as well. Is there one of those abilities that you've kind of added into your story? Is there one of those that you would really like to have yourself, or the special ability that you'd like to be able to have?
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember talking to some kids recently about the story, and it's sort of the nature of if you give your characters special abilities, and you think about any superhero story or any any fantasy story or whatever. That's sort of inevitably and necessarily for story, actually. They come with downsides, because if they are just a superpower and you can do anything, then where's the problem? Where's the threat? So they, feels like a great thing that you can hear your brother's thoughts, but there are going to be times you don't want to hear them. And there's going to be times where other people can hear them, and it's going to give you away and problematic and so forth. I think, what kid doesn't grow up being pretty excited by the idea of being able to fly? It doesn't matter if it's Peter Pan or Superman, that's pretty cool. I think most of us, and I think it's a natural place for the imagination to soar, because actually nature's given a bunch of creatures that capacity. So you'd be sitting on the beach and watching the seagulls soar. So it's not you're not trying to think, what would time travel be like? Or flying's just like sparrows can do it, mosquitoes, damn them, can do it. That'd be cool. And I think it would, wouldn't it? It'd be sort of wonderful to just be up and over and through. Yeah, who wouldn't love that?
Yeah, absolutely. The cover of your book is quite stunning. It's quite a cool cover and really draws them in. Did you like your cover? Did you when you first saw it, did you have a good reaction to it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's it's an interesting thing. When you first see the cover, it's somehow the book becomes a real thing. And you think, oh, that's going to be the book. And all these ideas and memories and hopes and associations I've got with the book, now that's it. Now there's this artifact that's what it is. And you come to sort of love it because it's, because you love the memory of it and the hope of it. And it's this thing. The books we make are precious to us. And I think it's very much like, until it happens, like naming a child. It's just a name until the child gets the name. And then it's no longer a name, it's the child. And you can only but love the name you gave your child, because it is no longer the name you gave them, it's now their name, And I think books are like that too a little bit. I don't think I ever look at a book cover and go, because for all the flaws or excitements of its cover, it suddenly becomes your book's cover. And it's just a way of your mind going, that's that story. And this one's always going to be real precious to me, because it's always going to be a memory of sitting by a double bunk with bits of A4 hurriedly printed off while they were cleaning their teeth, type stuff. It's definitely got a little a place in my heart. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, thank you very much for joining us tonight, and best of luck for the Book Awards. I really hope it does well.
Done enough already. Hey, thank you ever so much. How lovely to talk to you. Thanks for the questions. Thank you all.
Thanks.